Okay, so technical problems. My first time going live, so technical problems with the first stream. So hopefully you're all able to pick it up afterwards. So yeah, perennial grow along. We've lots of questions in from people who are taking part in the grow along, and it's going really well. So we're 1 week in, and already lots of people have questions and are trying to figure out how to do things. So I'm going to answer all the questions. Hopefully some of you find this live stream, as I said, technical issues. So I went live, I went to test and hung up, and yeah, I couldn't get back into my live stream. So anyway, we're going live. We are live now, and any questions, hopefully, as I say, some of you find this, but otherwise we have lots of questions in from people who are taking part in the grow along anyway. So to give you a little bit of an update as to what has been happening, so the seeds for all these perennials are sown for just over a week now, and already there's germination on 3 or 4 of the seeds. So for any of you that watch on Instagram, I posted a video yesterday of the progress, and I have germination on lupins, achillea, and salvias. And just to sort of recap, there's 10 perennial flowers that are sown within this grow along, and there is 5 or 6 native plants as well, so native seeds sown. And yeah, they're so far going quite well, but it is weather-wise, it's very, very mixed at the moment. So last week we had lots of rain, we had some really dull days, not much sunshine, and then last night we had our first night of frost here. Now it wasn't a heavy frost, but there was a little bit of frost, and then beautiful day today. So lovely sunshine. So yeah, it has been really mixed, and that's kind of the mixed start that can happen at this time of the year. But it is the best time of the year to sow perennial flowers, and you will have great success from it. I'm going to answer any of the questions that have come in over the last week. So there's a good few questions that have come in on Instagram, on email, and on YouTube as well, on the videos on YouTube. As I say, apologies on the initial link being incorrect, but it will be there once you go on to Master My Garden channel, it'll be there as a replay anyway. So to answer the questions, and I think the questions will be quite useful because they're going to help basically anybody else who has who's trying this grow along, and where there's things that somebody might be struggling with, I'm sure somebody else is as well. So to shoot through the questions, firstly, I have a couple of questions in from Stephen. Stephen is a long-term listener of the podcast and has grown his own perennials from seed before very successfully. So I'm not sure. I think Stephen might already have the knack of this, but he has some questions nonetheless in relation to sowing seeds. So the first one is, do I ever prepare seeds by keeping them in the fridge or in cold prior to sowing? And the short answer to that is no, I don't, generally speaking. So that process is called cold stratification, and it's a process where you're basically kickstarting the seed to come out of dormancy, and it helps the plants then to germinate. It's essential with certain seeds. For example, sea holly has to get a really strong period of cold, and that would benefit from something like a fridge. But the process by which we're sowing these, and the process by which I sow them, is in a polytunnel. It's quite open, and it will be quite cold. So that's going to happen naturally within the polytunnel anyway. So to answer the question, I don't really do that. But by the same token, the sowing of these at this time of the year will automatically give you that sort of cold exposure that the likes of echinacea, for example, and we have a question in on echinacea. So it is, that cold is going to happen naturally this time of the year anyway. So no, I don't specifically do it, but it does happen naturally this time of the year. A lot of nurseries, for example, when they're growing perennial plants, they will sow them from seed at this time of the year, leave them outside in cold frames, or sometimes they'll cover them with just, a bio netting or or a mesh just to keep the heavy rainfall and hail and things like that off them. But generally speaking, they're getting full exposure, and you grow very, very hardy plants like that. So I'm not specifically doing it, but it's naturally happening anyway at this time of the year. The next question from Stephen was on Rudbeckias. And he said that I mentioned, which I did in the first video, that Rudbeckias like stable temperatures. And he's asking, would outside in a cold frame do the same? And it would, but what I'd be more inclined to do would be to get either inside on a windowsill, conservatory, greenhouse, get your germination at that very, very first stage indoors, or on a, as I say, on a windowsill or greenhouse, and then move to your cold frame afterwards. So get your germination first, because they like stable temperatures, but that's really only important during that germination phase. So for the first, week or 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever it is, for the Rudbeckia to actually germinate. And once you get that, and once you get a little bit of growth into your seedlings, then it's good enough. Then you can move them to your cold frame at that stage. As I mentioned at the start there, we've had quite fluctuations. First frost last night, but then today, absolutely crystal blue skies, lovely sunshine. So you can imagine you're getting a big variance in temperature, and that's what we don't want for most seeds, but particularly for things like Rudbeckia. They just like that stable temperature at the start. So for Stephen, germinate on a stable temperature somewhere, and then move to your cold frame. Next question, not specifically relating to perennials, but nonetheless a good question. Is it too early to sow sweet pea? And the straightforward answer is yes, a little bit. So typically sweet peas, you're going to look to sow those October, say middle of October through to sort of early November, that sort of time period. And that's a brilliant time. What you'll end up with growing plants at that stage is a really hardy seedling, number one. So it's going to be quite tough at that time of the year. It'll have put on its root growth. It'll put on some top growth, but it won't be real leggy. If you go at this time of the year, it can be actually still a little bit warm for sweet pea. And so you'll get kind of a big push of growth. Now you can pinch them out, but just, you're better off to just leave it for a couple of weeks and then go. You'll have really hardy plants, and you can still sow sweet peas in the springtime, but what you'll get from these ones that you're going to sow in the autumn time is that you'll just get flower about a month or 6 weeks earlier than you will from spring sown ones. And they're not going to be leggy. They're going to be tough, bushy plants, which is what you want. So yeah, a little bit early. In a couple of weeks' time, you can go for sure at that. The next question is relating to the growing media. And yeah, it's directly relating to John Innes compost. So Stephen was in a garden centre, was looking for growing media to sow his seeds, and he was directed to John Innes number 1. They also had John Innes number 2 and 3, and he's asking what's the difference, and is it the right thing to sow seeds in? So I suppose it's a good question, and it very much, the growing media is very, very important at this time of the year. And the answer to that question is a bit tricky, because John Innes compost was, when it was developed originally, which was back in the 1920s or 30s, I think it's, it was a real old sort of trusted brand or type of compost. And what was really special about it was that it was developed because it was developed by the John Innes Institute, I think, and they didn't trust, or they didn't have consistent results with the growing media of the time. And so they developed this mix, which was a mix of loam, some peat, some sand, and they created specific mixes for the different stages of plant growth. So number 1 was for your seedling stage, was low in nutrients, but was quite airy and quite good for root development. So it was at that early stages, but very, very low in nutrients, which is exactly what you need at seedling stage. Then number 2 was sort of the next step up, where you'd be going into a sort of medium-sized plant. and it had increased nitrogen or nutrient levels within the mix. And so that was, that was a really good step up. And then number 3 was for more mature plants, quite a bit of nutrient in it, and it was it was a really good mix for more mature plants. The seed sowing mix then had no nutrients in it and was specifically for germinating seeds. However, that was at that time. Since then, the name John Innes, because it was such a trusted name in horticulture, because that name was so trusted, universally within gardening circles, people started to use that name in their own mixes. But these John Innes mixes are nowhere near as good as that original mix. They just are not. There's a lot of sand used in them because it's a cheap material, a lot of filler material used in it. So they're just not as good as they used to be. So is it good for sowing seed? It can be, but I still find that they're inconsistent. And I know I mentioned it and people won't like it, but the most consistent thing to germinate seeds is something that's peat based. Now you can have really, really good, homemade peat-free sowing mixes, but that's something you'd have to be planning for a while. You can use leaf mold, which is really, really old. You can mix it with sand and you can mix it with loam. It needs to be sterilized. There is ways of doing it, but you would need to be planning in advance. So for us who are just, looking to grow or get going at this so long, then, something like a seed sowing compost, peat-based seed sowing compost is really, really good. And you are only using a tiny, tiny amount. So for anyone that's worried about the use of peat, it's only a tiny amount that you are using. Now, if you decide you want to have peat, there is some very, very good, seed sowing mixes out there, but they tend to be based on coir. And, for anyone that listens to the podcast on a regular basis, my feelings on that is that coir is coming from halfway around the world. There's lots of pros and cons to it. Obviously, it's coming halfway around the world to sow seeds. I just don't know how environmentally friendly that is. So for me, I would use the peat mix. So to answer the question specifically, the difference between 1, 2, and 3 in the John Innes is they're for different stages. 1 is for the earliest stage, seedling stage. Number 2 is for the sort of medium-sized plant. It's with medium levels of nutrients in it. And then number 3 is for mature plants with a good bit of nutrient in it. That was typically what it was. And then your seed sowing mix was, John Innes seed sowing mix was specifically for germinating seeds. They can be quite good, but they can also be quite mixed and varied. So just watch that one. And the next question is, again from Stephen. This is Stephen's last question. Never had much luck with yarrow, and this year he has bought yellow cloth of gold. Any tips for success? Surprised actually that there hasn't been much success with it, because it is one of the easiest ones to germinate. Now, I reckon what your problem could be is that Achillea, when it germinates, it's one of the first ones. So it has germinated really, really quickly. Here within 6 days, I've had germination, good strong germination. But those seedlings are probably going to be the smallest of any of the seedlings from the 10 perennial plants that I've sown. So that means that they're very vulnerable in those early days. So they won't want too much water, but they'll always need to have some water. So they're going to need a little bit more attention. And I suspect, Stephen, because I know you've had success with lots of other flowers. So I suspect that it's a case of it either got a little bit dried out at some point after germination, because germination with Achillea is never an issue. It's really fast. Temperature is not overly critical. And once it germinates, but they are tiny, tiny seedlings in those initial stages and very, very vulnerable. Whereas the likes of a lupin, for example, is quite, stands up quite tall, quite quickly, is a little bit bigger, is a little bit less vulnerable. So I suspect that that's probably the issue. So just for that first week or two, make sure you give them sort of regular, as in daily, have a peep in at them. Make sure they're not drying out. And especially, as I said, at the moment, temperatures today in a greenhouse, you're probably going to be getting temperatures, once it's sealed up, you're going to be getting temperatures of 20, 25 degrees, because you have such bright sunshine. but then by night you could have a frost like we did here last night. So those variances could be harmful on those little small seedlings. So I suspect that that's probably what the issue was. So just in those initial stages, give them really good attention and care. Next question came in from Breda on YouTube, and she's asking, can these be all grown in the tunnel for the duration of the grow along? And yes, they can. All of mine will be grown within the tunnel. I might actually put some outside just to show, that can be done as well. But yeah, it can be grown inside for the duration of the tunnel. And she asks, how long should you leave the lid on the propagators? Now, I only have a lid on one of the propagators, but so as soon as I get good germination there, that lid will come off. However, what you're looking for is a bit like, for want of a better word or a better explanation, if you go outside at this time of the year, and some days you'll need your hoodie and your coat, and the next day you might be in a t-shirt. And just as you're doing that while you're out doing your gardening jobs, if you can just think of your plants in the same way, if there's a day where you have a coat and a hoodie on and you feel cold and it is cold and it's windy and it's maybe wet, then cover over your seedlings. If there's a day where the sun is shining and it's quite warm, I would say, you can open the vents at least or take off your cover altogether at that stage. What we don't want to get is we don't want to get them too hot for too long at this stage. We just want that little bit of heat into germination. And then we want the seedlings to grow strong after that, not leggy, not to drive the growth too much. So we're looking for heat in the germination stage, and then we're looking for slower, more compact growth as we go along past that. So I hope that answers that one. What temperature do Rudbeckia like to germinate? Because I mentioned the consistent temperatures in the first video. So they like a consistent temperature of 18 to 20 degrees Celsius. And that's just in that initial stage. So as I mentioned with Stephen's question earlier, you get that consistent germination at the start, and then once they're germinated, the temperature is not as critical at that stage. So 18 to 20 consistent temperature on Rudbeckias for that germination stage, and then after that, as I say, not as critical. Overwintering, can I do it outside? Yes, you can. Again, a little bit like what I said there a second ago, what we're looking to do, nurseries do this outside, but they will always have the availability of some form of cover. So you don't put it in the most exposed spot. Make sure that it's getting as much sun as possible, so you're getting that heat. But then you can cover, you can cover them with a bio netting or something like that, so that they're not fully exposed to the elements. But just in that very early stage, we want to get consistent temperature into it. So yeah, absolutely can be done outside, but maybe initially you're going to get the germination somewhere a little bit more consistently warm. As I say, this week alone gives you the prime example of that. You had, within the last week, really heavy rain, really heavy wind, cold, dark, and then you get a night of frost followed by a beautiful, warm, sunny day. So that variance is not what's needed at those initial stages. We want consistent heat. What stage should I take off the covers? And so, yeah, this is from an email today, and somebody has grown the pita. Only 1 or 2 have germinated, and they want to know at what stage to take off the covers. They've also sown echinacea, but didn't cover the seeds at sowing time, and they're asking, should I start all over again? Now, it's about 10 days since sowing. So no is the answer, that you don't need to sow again. I would give it a light covering, a really, really light covering, if you haven't already done that. So, but no need to start again. The seeds are there. They are going through, this cold stratification by naturally being outside, and they will germinate, but it's very different. So if any of you are used to growing vegetable seeds, the germination tends to be really, really consistent, really, really fast, but it's with flowers and with perennials, it's very different. So each one will germinate at different times. So as I say already, lupins, achillea, salvia are up, but there's no sign of any of the rest of them. And they will come over the next few weeks, but they won't all come at the same time. Even within the trade, it mightn't come at the same time. So that's why, don't panic at this stage. You will get germination. Just make sure you keep it once it has gone through that little bit of a cold period, which it will have done if you've had it out all week. Once it's gone through that, you will see it over the next few weeks. You will get germination, but it mightn't be all in one go. It might be a little bit slower. It might be at different stages, but you will see it. So no need to resow, but it would give them a slight covering if you haven't already done so. On the Nepitas, where you've only 1 or 2 germinated, I would guess that by this time next week, there'll be a lot more of those germinated. So the seed is probably good quality. So I would imagine that within a week, another week, a lot of those will be germinated. So yeah, they're the questions that have come in. Yeah, that's all of those covered. Glasses on now to have a look at the live stream. Apologies for anyone that jumped onto the link that I posted earlier. It's I started the link and then couldn't get back into it. So let's see. Stephen's asking, how many times a week should I water? This from Stephen's daughter. Lovely. So yeah, great to have younger people on as well. So that's how to answer that one. I suppose what you're looking for is the top of the seed tray to always be moist, but you're never looking for it to be dry. So a little bit of moisture on a regular basis, but you want to keep an eye on them as regular as you can. So especially with, the Achillea that you mentioned you were struggling to grow, there's a good chance that they germinated and then got dried out. Now, once we've got germination and once we get them established, after the pricking out stage, we'll try and grow all of these as dry as possible over the next few months. And that will mean that you're not going to get any build-up disease. They're not sitting in cold, wet compost. We'll grow it on the drier side. But I would definitely have a look at them every day. And if they need water, because, for example, as I said today, we had really bright sunshine, that's going to dry up the top of the compost. So that might need water today. And then if we get the same sort of weather tomorrow, again, it's going to be a case of the compost will dry up on top. So we're going to need to water again. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on them every day. And how many times a week depends on what's happening. If we get dull days, you can water today and it'll still be moist in 3 or 4 days' time. But if the sun comes out, then it might be dry and need watering again the next day. So hope that answers that one. Next one. Hello, any tips for echinacea? I've grown it before, but then it dies in the winter. So probably here, what we're looking at is exactly what I said there a second ago. So the germination part, what we're looking to do is keep the moisture in it. Then once we move to the next stage, which I'll be doing a video on, where we take the little seedlings, we move them onto a slightly bigger pot. From that stage on, we will be growing them as dry as possible. Enough water to keep them alive, but not allowing any disease to build up at this time of the year. Another really good tip is, and I'll show that again within a week or two on another video, I will use a seaweed and give them a little drink of seaweed in the coming weeks. And what that does is it increases root growth, number one, but it also makes the plants more resilient up on top and hardier up on top. And so you're less susceptible to diseases. But definitely, if you've grown it before and then it dies in the winter, that's most likely a case of it's a little bit too wet over that period of time. And we want to grow them, as I say, on the drier side. Next one, my Achillea this year put on foliage but never flowered. Same with the lupins. So that's possibly a timing thing. So if you sow Achillea, if you sow lupins, now lupins are a little bit different, but Achillea for sure, if you sow that in the springtime, you'll get plant growth, but you're not going to get flower in that year. So sown in the springtime, you'll get growth in year one, you get foliage in year one, and you should get flower in year two. But if you sow them in September at this stage of the year, you'll get your initial growth now. then you'll get your big flush of foliage growth in the springtime, and then you'll get your flower, but you will get your flower within that 12-month period. So I suspect if you didn't get it, it's because of a spring sowing rather than now lupins. As I say, I've sown lupins in the spring, and they can and do come to flower in the first year, but not always. So guaranteed from ones that you sow in this grow along in September, you will have flower next year. Uh, Guaranteed, says I. But I hope, provided it's good quality seed and all that sort of thing, there's no reason why you won't have flower. You won't have flower this time next year. So that is all the questions I think we've there now. Again, anyone that was jumping on the live stream earlier, apologies for messing up the first link. Either ways, anyone that wants to, this will be on the YouTube page on the Grow Along link, so you should be able to. How late can I sow my seeds? From Stephen's son. So everyone's getting involved in this Grow Along. This is good. You can sow them. You definitely want to have them sowed by the end of the month, but the earlier you can sow them, the better. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the likes of sweet pea, we can do them, later in the month, as in next month. But for now, any seeds that you have, try and get them in as soon as possible, but definitely before the end of September. So we have another couple of weeks left, but as soon as possible. The reason for that is that we will get this germination because our temperatures are still quite good. But if we go another month down the line, it's going to be a lot colder and it'll be a lot slower. Now, you still probably will get germination, but you'll just get much better growth, better germination by sowing now and allowing them to grow on over the next couple of months. Especially, I know you guys are using a cold frame, and that will be very useful. But get your germination first as early as possible. Next one, thanks so much. Hasn't been the best year. My zinnias grow so well, put on buds, but only a couple of flowers. So do they need to be planted into the ground? They were planted in pots. Not necessarily. They should have done well in pots, to be honest. Not sure what the reason for that is now, because generally speaking, it was quite a good year here in Ireland for all flowers. To be honest with you, it was a dry, relatively warm summer. So typically speaking, there has been good flowers all year. In pots, I suspect that if they haven't done well in pots, it's more than likely to do with the growing media rather than the plant itself. And we talk a lot on the podcast about so yes, it was sunny. Maybe I crammed too many in the same pot, possibly. But again, I think you still should have got some flower. I would imagine it's something to do with the growing media. So anything that you're growing in pots, flowers wise, anything that's going to be like that, I always look for, in my opinion, a really good mix is to get topsoil, good quality compost, and farmyard manure, and get that mix 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And that will give you everything that the plants are going to need. And I suspect that it's more to do with the growing media in that scenario than it is to do with having too many in it, because it was a great year flowers wise. Question, is this only for perennials or can I start annuals now too? It's the best time of the year to do perennials. So perennials that are sown in the springtime of a given year will germinate, will grow plants, but you will get very little flower or almost no flower in the first year. So what we're looking for to sow at this time of the year is your perennials. Now, there is some annuals that we can start, and there's some biennials that you can start. So, for example, sweet peas, we mentioned those. They can be sown next month. They're strictly speaking an annual, but they'll be, if you sow them now, you'll have flower much, much earlier next spring. And they'll be a hardier plant as well. So they'll be able to go out into your garden earlier. So it is specifically for perennials. Annuals, most of them you will start early in the springtime, but a couple you can do now, and some biennials as well. Okay, so lots of good questions in there. Brilliant. So what we'll do is this will be on the YouTube channel, and it'll be there under the Perennial Grow Along tab at the top. So even if people have questions afterwards, just pop them into the comments and I'll answer them there. Again, anyone that was jumping on at 8 o'clock, apologies for the mess up with the live stream. It's my first time to go live on any of the channels, to be honest with you. So I went in early to try and get the link to make sure everything was working, and then saw everything was working. So that's grand. I'll end the link here and then jump back in. Little did I know you can't jump back in, or if you can, I didn't figure it out in time. So apologies for that. Many thanks, love the channel. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, so loads of info for anyone that's finding it for the first time. Master My Garden podcast is out every week, and it is all this type of tips, weekly sowing guide or monthly sowing guides, interviews with open gardens, and so on. So yeah, lots of info there. There's 200 and something 80 episodes or so there now, and yeah, pretty much any gardening topic that you can think of is there. So should be something there for everyone, no matter what sort of gardening you're doing. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to Stephen and family for all the questions. Best of luck with that. It's nice to see everyone getting involved there, and I'm sure there'll be great success. I saw the pictures from last year's perennials that were growing, and yeah, they were brilliant. So looking forward to see what's growing this year, and hopefully the Achillea this year is successful. It should be. It is one of the easier ones to grow. So I think it's probably something to do with the fact that they're really tiny seedlings, and just those first couple of weeks are critical to make sure that they don't get forgotten about for any day. So you have enough vines there to get on them anyway. So yeah, thanks very much for all the questions. As I say, anyone has more questions, just drop them in the comments afterwards and I'll answer those. We'll do the next video in a few weeks' time. So when all of these are starting to germinate and we're moving to the next stage, so we're moving seedlings into little potted trays, then we'll do another video just showing that, and we'll take you through all the stages. So for any of you that's been watching from the start, we're sowing these seeds, we're tending to these plants, we're bringing them all the way, and then next year we're going to have all these perennial plants to plant into our gardens, and hopefully, by next August, September, we're going to be looking at perennial beds that we've grown from seed, and hopefully you guys have as much success as possible with this. So yeah, thanks a million. Again, apologies for the live stream at the start, but yeah, it's as I say, first time going on, so I'll have it nailed for the next time. Thank you very much, and good night to everybody.